Google's shaking up Stadia, but the headlines, they're not entirely accurate. Google announced yesterday that they are closing their internal gaming studio for Stadia, meaning that they are no longer going to produce in-house exclusives for their gaming platform. So this is a really interesting move, and as is tradition in the world of Google, as soon as they launch something, everybody starts saying, when's it gonna die? And there's no, it's justifiable. I mean, there's no real defending that because Google does a lot of interesting things. They launch hard, they have a commitment issue, and then they kind of fizzle out. And so we need to kind of just digest what is going on, what Google actually said, what this really means for the industry, because I think people are jumping potentially to the wrong conclusion with Stadia, and there's a lot to digest. So let's just roll it back. Google launched Stadia roughly a year ago, and part of Google's problem is that they have a commitment issue. They really do. Like, they launch things and they get them out the door, and then if they don't explode in popularity, then Google just kind of like shrivels up and fades away from them, and then they shut them down pretty quick. They don't stick around for the long term. And so when Google said they were building an in-house gaming studio, it was good, right? New games, new content, that's awesome. But at the same time, games don't develop in 6 months. They take 5-6 years. Like, it's a massive capital injection. There's a long delay, and then hopefully there's a huge payoff. So when Google launched Stadia, and then they said, we're going to go in-house, everyone was like, hey, they're going to shut that thing down. And, well, thankfully, we have a new correspondent called Shocked Pikachu, and let's see what Shocked Pikachu had to say about Google shutting down something we all knew they were going to do. Exactly. We all knew this was coming. We all knew that part of this was coming. But the headlines are saying that Stadia is dead, and Stadia is, in fact, not dead. So let's just sort of dig in here, because there's some other things we need to consider first. First of all, Google's Chromecast, which is probably the best way to play it, their new Chromecast still doesn't support Stadia. So as Stadia as a standalone service, it's still not looking great. But they're shifting the model here, because right now Google is saying, hey, we are just going to go out to the market and we are going to buy content. That is the way we are going to approach it. And that pretty much fits Google's model of being able to just go out, pick what they like, put it into their service, and run with it. Now, it worked pretty well for them with Cyberpunk. At least they were able to get it in there. And they can also make that, that loud offer of saying, look, you can play this right away, no download required, and which that is a big deal. And that is the model Google is going to run with. They're going to go up to third parties, buy exclusivity content, and then just put it into Stadia. That is what they're going to run with. But the question is that going to work? Because there's a lot of reason to believe that it may not. First of all, let's think about Stadia's business model, which is not a true subscription service like Luna or xCloud, for example. xCloud, as we all know, once it launches on the PC, you'll be able to pay for it as a subscription service and play the games that are available. Same with Luna. On Stadia, you actually go out and buy the game and then stream it, and then depending on if you're paying for their higher tier of service, then you'll be able to stream it at higher fidelity. But the game resides in Stadia, which brings up a lot of questions, especially right now, because there's some uncertainty around the future of Stadia. Let's say you had $200 to go invest in games. Would you feel confident buying into Stadia right now, knowing that your games are locked to that platform? Now, granted, Stadia, the actual technical solution, is honestly pretty good. Like, Stadia plays pretty well with my dedicated controller here playing up on this screen behind me with the Chromecast that came with it, because the new ones don't support it. It works. Like, I don't have an issue with the technical side of it. And I don't know if I could tell somebody that putting money into Stadia right now would be a good long-term investment. Now, we don't know what Google actually plans to do if they ever do shut this down. Maybe they'll just let you download the game for Steam. But Google's play now is that they're not in the gaming arena, so they're not competing with other studios. They're more of they're sort of like a Steam, but Steam not making games, if that makes sense. Now, what is Google's long-term play here? I don't think Google will be shutting down Stadia. At least they're not going to be killing the technology anytime soon. Google's play, honestly, might just be to build the platform, show that it works, and then try to sell it to studios and be like, look, if you want a bespoke streaming solution that is white-labeled with your name on it, we're the platform. And look, we don't even have a game studio, so we're not competing with it. Yeah, we got Stadia, but look, you can run it on Google Cloud. Microsoft has done this, honestly, pretty well with Azure. They go to companies that are competing against Amazon and be like, look, we're not a grocery store, we're not a retailer. Come, put your stuff on our cloud because we're not AWS. Now that might work for Stadia for the long term, and that honestly just might be the play. But the big question is how long does Stadia, the service as we know, stick around right now? It's an interesting question because part of me really wants Stadia to succeed because we have Stadia, we have xCloud, Amazon is working on Luna, and I'm sure there's Facebook has their own solution that's coming, and Apple has Arcade and all that. And the market is better off with more streaming solutions. The problem is what's the enticement to use Stadia if they're not going to go with first-party titles? Because using the analogy of going to a studio, for example, if you are a big studio, I'm talking a big studio here, like an EA or an Ubisoft or somebody like that caliber. If Google comes to you and says, hey, we want exclusivity for that game, yes, the money up front maybe is the driving factor, but if you're a developer, how many people are actually going to be playing your game? What's more important? Yes, you got to pay the bills. You absolutely have to pay the bills, but putting your game on PlayStation and Xbox is absolutely going to sell. Putting it on Stadia, you might get money up front, but if nobody plays your game, then did you just spend 5 years building a title that only a handful of people are going to play? So Google is losing some control here by not having your own first-party IP, which Microsoft is extremely aware of, which is why they bought Bethesda and which is why they're out there happy hunting for additional acquisitions. They know that you have to have first-party IP. Otherwise, you're just another service. And the Stadia proposition, I don't know if it is strong enough for the high-end hardcore gamer to want to play any sort of game on there as opposed to a local console or a PC. It's a tough decision. Now, the other thing, too, here is this, in my opinion, amplifies Microsoft's need for buying up studios or PlayStations or anybody else, because now they know that Google is not going to be doing internal games, which means they're going to take that money, in theory, based on what Google has said, is that they're going to now go to third parties and try to snatch up IP exclusive for their platform, which means if Microsoft wants to have a chance at getting some of that content, they need to own the studio potentially. Granted, Microsoft could sign exclusivity agreements. It's not, that's an old tactic in the industry. It has been around. It has proven to work, but I don't think that this means that Google is exiting. It means that they're shifting their strategy, which means Microsoft and Sony and everybody else in this arena need to be looking at those third parties. It just means that Google, at least based on what they said, they're not going to go out and buy Ubisoft. They're not going to go out and buy Paradox or Platinum. Like, they're not looking to buy studios. They're just looking to buy IP. And for some studios, that is absolutely going to be lucrative. And so it's going to be interesting to see if this shifts any of the narratives for any of the companies now that Microsoft and PlayStation both know that Google is going out there shopping for IP explicitly and not just the studio. It changes the narrative, and it also changes how the strategy about how I think Microsoft and Sony honestly need to be thinking about this, because Google has a lot of money. Google is invested heavily, but the underlying technology is never going to go away. Google will continue to offer. Microsoft does this all the time. They have lots of services that basically they have to flick a switch and turn it on. Now, will Stadia, the front end, the marketing assets, stay online? That we don't know, but the back-end technology absolutely will, because Google built it out, and you're just not going to go delete the code just because it's not running. It's interesting to see what Google is doing here, and I don't know if it's necessarily a positive, but I don't think it necessarily means that Stadia is over. They're just shifting priorities about how they want to bring content into the platform. That being said, we all know that Google has an attention span issue, and many people, myself included, are joking that, hey, this looks like it's sort of the beginning of the end. We don't really have any insight into the user base of Stadia. We've known it's been pretty small, and we know that they've been trying to attract people, but at the same time, you need that first-party IP, which Google is now not going to have. They're going to have third-party licensed IP, which means it may not be completely exclusive, and so we need to just be watching about upcoming agreements. If you want to look at the long-term health of Stadia, that is the focus that you need to be paying attention to. What studios are they signing up to get exclusive IP into the platform? Maybe they have a big one in their back pocket, and this is like the first step. They're just clearing house, and it's unfortunate that many people are going to be losing their jobs, or they might find other roles inside of Google, but that being said, The thing to be watching with Stadia is where and what are they signing next, because that will indicate the health of it. Now, on the xCloud side, Microsoft service should be coming online here fairly soon. They've already talked about it happening for the PC and on iOS, and those are the two missing components for xCloud or cloud streaming, and that will be a defining moment, I think, for Stadia, because then you will have a better one-to-one comparison about how these platforms shake out. Now, Luna is there, and Luna is fine. It's not, I don't think it's on the same like category as what cloud gaming will be from, or cloud streaming from Microsoft, and I even think Stadia has a better portfolio of games like that they've licensed than Luna, if you will. But Amazon again has a bunch of money and can change that narrative, and it's also on a different model. It's on that subscription model. So once xCloud and cloud gaming launches, and once Stadia is out there, that's when like the real horse race begins, because there's better comparables. And we all know that Microsoft has a much better strategy. They have the subscription, which means you just pay a small fee and then you get access to a whole bunch of games, whereas Stadia requires you to buy the game and then you have to be locked into that. And so I don't want to spell doom and gloom for Stadia, because I don't think we're there yet. But Google is making moves because it's clear that the internal strategy they thought was going to work isn't, and so now they're shifting priorities. The question is, are they actually shifting priorities, or are they just blowing up marketing smoke to make it sound like they're actually shifting priorities? That we don't know. But keep it subscribed here, folks, because the only BS on this channel is me, and yeah, let's just roll with that.